The spotlight has always been on her famous face. But for 6 decades, the most defining chapter of Melissa Gilbert's life remained hidden in the shadows of her own origin story. At 62, the beloved star of Little House on the Prairie has finally pulled back the curtain on a secret that would shock even her most devoted fans. What she discovered wasn't just a family tree, it was a tangled, jaw-dropping web of motorcycle escapes, hidden siblings, and a truth so explosive it threatens to rewrite everything we thought we knew about America's sweetheart. Before we uncover what really happened, tell us in the comments, what do you think is the biggest misunderstanding about this story? Melissa Gilbert was in the middle of a motorcycle trip when her life took a sharp turn. In a moment caught on camera, a fellow rider leaned in close, his voice carrying a casual observation that would shatter the foundation of her identity. He mentioned she looked just like someone he used to know, a man named Paul. For most people, it would be a fleeting comment, easily dismissed and quickly forgotten. But for Melissa, those words struck like a thunderbolt. She had grown up with a secret that had always felt like a shadow just out of reach. The family story handed down to her was one of loss and separation, but it never added up. She had always known she was adopted, but the details of her origin, the who, the why, the when, were a carefully guarded mystery. Her mother, Barbara Cohen, had a history that read like a Hollywood novel. A stand-up comedian and dancer, she was married to a comedian named Paul Gilbert when she gave birth to Melissa. When Barbara divorced Paul in 1971, Melissa's story got rewritten. She was adopted by her mother's new husband, Harold Abeles. The courts legally changed her last name to Gilbert. It was a convenient erasure of a past that no one wanted to discuss. But the motorcycle trip and that stranger's observation planted a seed of profound curiosity in her mind. She started to wonder about the man she only knew as a biological footnote. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how little she actually knew. When she finally asked her mother, she was met with a wall of silence and sudden outrage. Instead of answers, she was given a book titled Famous Hollywood Families, a clue so cryptic it felt like a threat. The book contained a photo of her grandmother, Julia Gilbert. Next to it was a story that seemed impossible. It alleged that Julia, her biological grandmother, had once been married to a man with a notorious reputation, a man who had a daughter named Melissa. The implication was staggering. Melissa Gilbert might not have been Paul's child at all. She was left with a burning question that no one in her family seemed willing to answer. The motorcycle trip that had sparked an innocent comment from a fellow rider now took on an entirely new meaning. That seemingly offhand observation about her resemblance to a man named Paul was actually the first thread in a tapestry far more complex than she ever imagined. When Melissa finally began pulling on that thread, the entire fabric of her family history unraveled before her eyes. What she discovered about her biological parents was nothing short of astonishing. Her birth mother, Kathy, was an exotic dancer. Her birth father was a stock car racer and musician, a man who lived fast and loved hard. But the circumstances of her conception were so dramatic they could have been lifted from a Hollywood screenplay. Her biological parents were each married to other people, and each had 3 children of their own. They ran off together on that motorcycle trip in the desert, and Melissa was conceived amidst the dust and freedom of the open road. Explains a lot, she would later joke, acknowledging the wild romanticism of her origin story. The fallout was seismic. Her biological parents left their respective spouses for each other, married after discovering she was on the way, and attempted to blend their families. Suddenly, Melissa was number 7 in a household already bursting with children from 2 previous marriages. The decision was made, perhaps painfully, to place her up for adoption. But the revelations about her biological family weren't the only shocks waiting for her. As Melissa pieced together the fragments of her past, she uncovered a truth about her adoptive father that would cut deeper than any family secret. Paul Gilbert, the man who had raised her and given her his name, had died when she was just 11 years old. She had been told he passed away peacefully in his sleep. The reality was far more devastating. He had died by suicide. The weight of this discovery was crushing. She had spent years believing her adoptive father had simply slipped away, only to learn that he had been suffering in silence. The grief she had processed as a child now demanded to be felt all over again, with the painful clarity of adult understanding. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe so you never miss our next documentary. Yet even as these revelations piled up, one question remained tantalizingly out of reach. Melissa's biological mother had passed away before she could ever meet her, a door closed forever. But her biological father was still out there. The question was whether he even knew she existed, and if he did, whether he would want to meet the daughter he had given up decades ago. The uncertainty gnawed at her, but the trail was about to grow much warmer than she ever expected. For decades, Melissa Gilbert had been navigating the labyrinth of her origins with nothing more than fragments and whispers. She had already discovered her birth father's side of the family years ago, a revelation that came with its own complications and closed doors. But the other half of her biological story, the maternal side, remained stubbornly out of reach, a locked room with no visible key. Then, in a development that felt almost like fate, technology intervened. A few weeks before she would turn 62, Melissa logged onto a DNA family tracking app. It was a simple act, the kind of casual curiosity that millions of people engage in daily. But for Melissa, it would open a door she had long since given up hope of finding. The app connected her with a man named Harry Lee Scott. It turned out he was her fifth biological cousin on her birth mother's side. But Harry was no passive relative content with a digital connection. He was a genealogical detective in his own right, armed with patience and an insatiable curiosity. His research, which Melissa would later compare to the investigative work on the PBS series Finding Your Roots, began peeling back layer after layer of her family history. Harry's investigation led to a discovery that would change everything. He found her biological siblings on her birth mother's side, 3 older brothers she had never known existed. Melissa had spent a lifetime wishing for a big brother. Now, at 62, she discovered she had 3, Matt, Laird, and Mark. The news was bittersweet, as Mark had already passed away, but the 2 surviving brothers were alive and waiting to meet her. The impact of this revelation was immediate and profound. Melissa took to Instagram to share the news, describing the past few weeks as remarkable. She wrote, "I'd always wished for a big brother and I found out I have 3. My older brothers are fantastic human beings. Matt and I are becoming especially close." She described her complex family history with characteristic wit. "I've always said that I don't have a family tree, I have a family shrub. It's now more of a climbing rose vine, covering an enormous wall with its many different shapes and colored blooms." Matt, now 66, was equally moved. In his own Instagram post, he wrote, "Well, this wasn't on my 2026 bingo card. After 66 years, I learned that my brothers Laird Stephen E. Payne and Mark A. Olson Sr. and I have a biological sister." But what made his words truly unforgettable was his declaration about what this discovery meant to him. "Before anyone asks, the part that means the most to me isn't that she's a public figure. It's that we've finally found each other after a lifetime apart." If this story surprised you, share it with someone who would enjoy uncovering forgotten Hollywood stories. Those words carried a weight that transcended celebrity. Matt had found his sister, not through fame or fortune, but through blood and the stubborn persistence of a distant cousin who refused to let history remain buried. Matt also made sure to acknowledge his adopted sister, Mariana, who had been his sibling his entire life, noting that finding a biological sister didn't change that bond one bit. Yet as heartwarming as this reunion was, Melissa hinted that the full story was far from complete. She promised to share more details soon on Substack, describing the true story of their adoptions as a jaw-dropper. The phrase hung in the air like a promise and a warning. What other secrets were waiting to be unearthed? And why had the 2 sides of her biological family been kept so deliberately apart? The doors that were opening in her life were also revealing the cracks in the story she had been told for decades. While the reunion with her maternal brothers brought warmth and validation, the path ahead would require confronting the fractures that had been left behind. Some wounds, it seemed, were only beginning to heal. The discovery of her maternal brothers had given Melissa Gilbert something she had craved her entire life, a sense of biological belonging. But that reunion, as precious as it was, came with a complex history that the actress was still processing. While her connection with her birth mother's side blossomed, the story on her biological father's side was far more complicated. She had managed to track down his family years earlier, but those relationships, as she later admitted, remained fraught with difficulties. The door had opened, but the welcome inside was not as warm as she had hoped. Still, Her journey to find her birth father had been nothing short of extraordinary. When she finally gathered the courage to call him, she didn't reveal who she was. Instead, she let him ask the questions. He wanted to know what she did for a living, and she knew it was time to reveal the truth. And I said, "Well, here's the thing. Did you ever watch Little House on the Prairie?" And he said, "You're Laura, aren't you?" I knew it. He knew it. He had seen her on television and recognized something in that familiar face. When she later met her half-siblings, the resemblance was undeniable. "We all look alike. So, you could definitely see it. So, it's pretty clear," she said. "If you're enjoying this story, subscribe so you never miss our next documentary." But there was a profound sadness woven into her biological story as well. Her birth mother, Kathy, passed away before Melissa ever had the chance to meet her. A door that would remain closed forever. In a poignant Mother's Day tribute, Melissa honored both her adoptive mother and her birth mother with words that captured the complexity of her feelings. The one with the rifle? I grew under her heart. The one beside me? I grew in her heart. And then there was the mystery of her adoptive father, Paul Gilbert. The man who gave her his name had died when she was just a child. She was told he died of a stroke in his sleep. It wasn't until she was 45 that she learned the devastating truth. He had died by suicide. The secret had been buried for decades, and unearthing it reopened wounds she thought had healed. As Melissa continued to gather the fragments of her past, one thread remained tantalizingly unresolved. There was another half-sibling on her birth father's side that she and her newfound family were still trying to contact. The search was not over. The climbing rose vine was still reaching for more branches, more connections, more answers. What would she find when she finally knocked on that door? The discovery of her 3 maternal brothers had given Melissa Gilbert a sense of completion she never thought possible. But even as she celebrated these long-awaited reunions, the actress revealed there was yet another door still waiting to be opened, one more half-sibling on her birth father's side that she and her family were actively trying to contact. The search, it seemed, would never truly be over. Melissa's journey had begun decades earlier when she first located her birth father's family. That initial reunion, however, was not the fairy tale she had hoped for. She described those relationships as fraught and still full of secrets. The door had opened, but the welcome inside had been complicated. Then came the breakthrough on her mother's side. Through a DNA app, she connected with her 5th cousin Harry Lee Scott, whose meticulous genealogical research, which she compared to the work on PBS's Finding Your Roots, led her to her maternal brothers, Matt, Laird, and Mark, who had passed away years earlier. At 62, Melissa finally had the big brothers she had always wished for. The bond with Matt, now 66, grew especially close. In his own heartfelt post, he wrote, "Before anyone asks, the part that means the most to me isn't that she's a public figure. It's that we've finally found each other after a lifetime apart." He also made sure to acknowledge his adopted sister Mariana, who had been his sibling his entire life, noting that finding a biological sister didn't change that bond one bit. Through it all, Melissa's adoptive family remained her rock. Her mother Barbara and sister Sarah had been remarkably supportive of her journey, and she emphasized how deeply she loved them both. As she continues reaching out to that final half-sibling, Melissa reflected on the extraordinary adventure of her life. Even at 62 years old, it continues to surprise me. The woman who once described her family as a shrub now sees it as a climbing rose vine covering an enormous wall with its many different shapes and colored blooms. And somewhere out there, another branch was still waiting to be discovered. If you enjoyed this documentary, like the video and subscribe for more true celebrity stories every week.